For 2 decades, from the mid-1950s to the mid-1970s, there was a quiet icon that carried millions of Americans across interstate highways, the Greyhound Scenicruiser bus. With its unique deck-and-a-half layout, panoramic wraparound windows, onboard air conditioning, and even a restroom, the Scenicruiser was once called America's land yacht. But behind that striking appearance lies a tangled technical story. A bus powered by 2 side-by-side diesel engines, a non-synchronized drivetrain, and mechanical issues that drove both drivers and technicians crazy. A groundbreaking design, yet deeply flawed. So why was the Scenicruiser built this way? Why did Greyhound and GMC gamble on such a bizarre concept? And what made it one of the most remembered buses in American transportation history? Let's find out in today's journey. In the early 1950s, Greyhound was at the peak of long-distance passenger transportation in America. But they didn't want to just be a bus company. They wanted to be an icon. At a time when private cars were becoming more common and air travel was beginning to capture upscale passengers, Greyhound needed something truly different. A bus that could capture attention at first glance. A machine that didn't just transport people, but inspired journeys. That's when the idea for the Scenicruiser was born. Greyhound partnered with General Motors, America's automotive giant at the time, to bring this vision to life. But they didn't stop at engineering. They turned to a legendary name, Raymond Loewy, the industrial designer behind the Coca-Cola bottle, Lucky Strike packaging, and the iconic Studebaker cars. Loewy brought not only aerodynamic elegance, but also true design soul to the Scenicruiser. At the same time, Greyhound wanted the new bus to carry more passengers, offer better comfort, and stand out from every rival. That's why they set extremely ambitious demands. A bus over 40 feet long, with 2 levels of seating, panoramic observation deck, air conditioning, an onboard restroom, and smooth ride comfort. From these demands began a 7-year design journey. The result was the creation of 2 bold prototypes, GX1 and GX2, the ancestors of the Scenicruiser. These weren't just test vehicles, they were symbols of ambition and long-term vision few bus companies dared to pursue. The first prototype, GX1, was developed in the late 1940s and officially patented in 1951. It was a true double-decker coach, with the upper deck for scenic passengers and the lower deck for standard seating. Loewy and then Greyhound president Orville Caesar were both listed on the patent, emphasizing the importance of both design and strategic vision. However, GX1 had a major problem. It was too tall to fit into Greyhound's existing bus garages. It measured 35 feet long, standard for the time, but its excessive height made it impractical for widespread use. Orville Caesar, a firm and pragmatic leader, ordered a complete redesign. The result was the GX2, a true breakthrough. GX2 was no longer a full double-decker, but a deck-and-a-half design. The front portion of the bus featured an elevated section for scenic viewing, while the rear was lower for ease of maintenance and overall height reduction. The vehicle stretched to 40 feet, far beyond the norm of the era, and paved the way for a new generation of highway buses. Technically, GX2 was powered by a Detroit diesel 671 inline-6 engine, paired with a 4-speed, non-synchronized manual gearbox and a 2-speed splitter, resulting in 8 total forward gears. Its centralized hydraulic system powered everything from windshield wipers to power steering and brakes. While still experimental, GX2 came very close to the final Scenicruiser. Interestingly, the patent for GX2 no longer featured Raymond Loewy's name. Instead, it listed Albert Boker, a GM design engineer. Still, Loewy's firm remained involved in the overall design. In many ways, the Scenicruiser was born from constant dialogue between engineering, aesthetics, and operational reality. When production officially began in 1954, the Scenicruiser wasn't just a beautiful bus. It was a bold, almost reckless, technical leap. Greyhound and GMC didn't choose the safe route. Instead, they equipped the Scenicruiser with one of the most unusual drivetrains ever installed in a commercial vehicle. Twin diesel engines running side by side. Instead of a desired V8 engine, the Scenicruiser was powered by two GM Detroit diesel 471s, four-cylinder, two-stroke engines mounted in parallel at the rear, connected via a fluid coupling. Why? At the time, GM didn't have a suitable diesel V8 for buses, and they weren't about to install a competitor's engine. What began as a temporary solution became permanent. Each engine fed into a non-synchronized 3-speed Spicer manual transmission, paired with a 2-speed splitter, high and low, giving the driver 6 forward gears. It sounded reasonable on paper, but in practice, it created endless headaches. First, drivers had to double-clutch every gear change. Second, the two engines had to stay perfectly synchronized. If they drifted out of phase, the bus would shake, lose power, or worse, tear apart its own drivetrain. Things got worse when many drivers, believing they were amateur mechanics, tried tweaking the engines themselves. Adjusting one without the other ruined the delicate balance. Maintenance centers were often unprepared, undertrained, and under-equipped to service dual-engine setups. Parts were scarce, procedures unclear, and many Scenicruisers rolled down the road with only half a heart beating properly. To make matters more complicated, the Scenicruiser also relied on an elaborate central hydraulic system. From the brakes to power steering to windshield wipers, everything ran off the same hydraulic setup, containing 7 gallons of fluid, sometimes pressurized to 1,500 psi. While it made operations smooth, it also made maintenance far more difficult. But don't be too intimidated by the Scenicruiser's complex drivetrain, because its interior was truly captivating. Greyhound invested heavily to turn the Scenicruiser into America's rolling hotel. The first impression came from its panoramic glass design on the upper deck. Passengers seated above not only enjoyed an elevated view, but were also surrounded by wide glass panels, creating the sensation of gliding across the American landscape in a glass observation car. Children often competed for those coveted front row seats, where they could look straight out the front windshield, a view that virtually no other vehicle offered at the time. The seating was also carefully designed. Greyhound and Raymond Loewy selected a specially woven, multicolored fabric with a crisscross pattern. The goal wasn't just aesthetic, it was practical. They wanted a fabric that could conceal stains and wear over time. This kept the buses looking clean, even after serving thousands of passengers each year. In terms of amenities, the Scenicruiser came equipped with air conditioning, a cigarette smoke ventilation system, and even a separate onboard restroom, a luxury for its era. The AC vents were cleverly positioned to ensure even airflow throughout the cabin. Meanwhile, the ceiling vents helped filter the air, especially important during a time when passengers were still allowed to smoke on board. The underfloor luggage compartment was spacious, allowing storage of large suitcases and cargo. Additionally, some Scenicruiser routes even featured onboard attendants, something unheard of for regular intercity bus service. But beneath that glamorous exterior was a mechanical nightmare that Greyhound paid dearly for. It all started with the choice of drivetrain. The use of two Detroit diesel 471 engines, each with only 4 cylinders, was a reluctant compromise because GM didn't yet have a suitable diesel V8. These engines were paired through a fluid coupling, sending power to a non-synchronized 3-speed manual transmission with a 2-speed splitter for a total of 6 forward gears. On paper, it looked like a flexible solution. In practice, it was a disaster. For the twin engines to work effectively, they had to be perfectly synchronized. If just one engine ran out of phase or underperformed, the whole system would lose power, shake violently, and become vulnerable to failure. And this happened far more often than anyone expected. One major reason? The drivers. Many believed they could tune the engines to run smoother or stronger, but this usually led to misalignment between the two. Meanwhile, Greyhound's garage staff were undertrained, spare parts were scarce, and there were hardly any clear procedures for maintaining a dual-engine setup. The result? Hundreds of Scenicruisers ran with only one engine functioning properly, or worse, both malfunctioning. Breakdowns were frequent, service delays common, and customer trust in Greyhound began to erode. The situation became so serious that Greyhound had to launch a nationwide retrofit program. All 1,001 Scenicruisers were converted to run a single Detroit diesel 8V71 V8 engine, a far more powerful, simpler, and reliable alternative. At the same time, the transmission was upgraded from a 3-speed to the more familiar 4-speed, non-synchronized manual that drivers were already comfortable with. After mounting complaints from both drivers and passengers, Greyhound was forced to act. Within just a few years of putting the Scenicruiser into service, the company launched one of the largest retrofit programs in the history of commercial bus transportation in America. First came the drivetrain overhaul. As previously mentioned, all 1,001 Scenicruisers had their twin 471 engines replaced with a single Detroit diesel 8V71 V8, a more powerful, more reliable, and far easier to maintain unit. With only one engine, but significantly more horsepower, the bus became mechanically simpler while maintaining its performance. Next was the transmission upgrade. The original 3-speed with a 2-speed splitter, which had proven difficult for drivers, especially with double clutching, was replaced by a 4-speed, non-synchronized manual transmission, similar to what Greyhound used in other coaches at the time. This made it easier for drivers to adapt and reduced breakdowns caused by gear shifting errors. Additionally, some of the more complex hydraulic systems were simplified, easing the maintenance burden. While the exterior of the Scenicruiser remained largely unchanged internally, it had been completely transformed. These upgrades not only helped restore Greyhound's reputation, but also extended the lifespan of the fleet, with many Scenicruisers continuing to operate well into the mid-1970s, far beyond their original service expectations. The technical upgrades made the Scenicruiser more durable, but what made it immortal was its impact on design and passenger experience. Its deck-and-a-half layout, with elevated seating and wraparound glass, not only created a unique scenic view, but also inspired many later bus designs. The most obvious example was the GMC Buffalo bus. Its successor launched in the late 1960s, which carried clear design DNA from the Scenicruiser. But the Scenicruiser's influence went beyond looks. It set new standards for modern intercity coaches. Air conditioning, onboard restrooms, large luggage compartments, and even onboard attendants. What was once considered luxury in the 1950s gradually became standard in American long-distance travel. The Scenicruiser wasn't a perfect vehicle, but to many, it symbolized a bygone era, cross-country journeys, and a restless, forward-moving America. It began with bold but risky engineering choices: twin diesel engines, a non-synchronized transmission, and a complex hydraulic system. It frustrated drivers and mechanics alike and forced Greyhound into one of the largest retrofit programs in its history. But despite the trouble, the Scenicruiser lives on, in memory, in spirit, as a symbol of innovation, ambition, and an experience that couldn't be replicated. Today, only a few Scenicruisers remain. But if you ever sat beneath those panoramic windows or heard the rumble of its engine on the highway, you probably still remember and never forgot. Have you ever seen a Scenicruiser in person or have a story to share about one? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss more fascinating automotive stories ahead.